Claire Anderson never imagined that a professional promotion could completely destroy the life she believed she had built. But that was exactly what happened on that Thursday in June. She had been an architect for 10 years, specializing in high-end residential projects in Chicago. Her portfolio included award-winning residences, penthouse apartments with views of Lake Michigan, and recently, a complex of lofts that had caught the attention of investors from New York City. That afternoon, at 34 years old and 5 months pregnant, Claire had just signed the biggest contract of her career, a luxury development on the Chicago lakefront that represented years of work, networking, and sleepless nights refining proposals. She had left the meeting with her hands still trembling with adrenaline. It was real. It had happened. After 3 months of negotiations, presentations, and endless project revisions, the director had finally extended a pen and said, "You earned this, Claire. Congratulations." The contract was signed. Her name was on that document. Her career had just reached a new level. To celebrate, the director of the investment group insisted on dinner at The Ashton, a prestigious restaurant in the River North neighborhood, famous for its exclusivity and its chef's tasting menu, prepared by a chef who had trained in Paris. Claire accepted, although she was exhausted. The pregnancy made her days slower, her body heavier. Sometimes, just climbing the stairs to her office made her feel her heart race and her legs weigh like lead. But she wouldn't let that overshadow this moment of victory. Not now, not when everything she had fought for was finally coming to fruition. Around 3:30 inches the afternoon, while organizing the architectural plans in her office, carefully folding each sheet, storing them in the correct folders, and categorizing them by project phase, she sent a message to Richard Davis, her husband of 8 years. They had been together for 11. "Having dinner with the client tonight. Big contract closed. I'll be home late. Kisses." She looked at the screen while waiting for a response, feeling a small pang of guilt. Richard had commented the previous week that she had been distant, always focused on work, but he understood, didn't he? This was important. It was her career, their future, the baby's future. Richard's reply came almost instantly. "Great. My brother called me. He's feeling sick again. I'm going to stop by to see how he is. Sleep well if I'm late. I love you, Princess." Claire smiled as she read. Richard's brother, Michael, had chronic health problems, uncontrolled diabetes, high blood pressure, a series of complications that never seemed to end. Richard had always been devoted to his family. Michael lived an hour away in Naperville, and Richard visited at least twice a month, sometimes more. Nothing about it seemed strange. Nothing seemed suspicious. In fact, she even felt a sense of relief. They would both have commitments, and neither would need to feel guilty for working late. Neither would have to wait up for the other, forcing conversations when they were too tired to articulate coherent sentences. Claire replied quickly, "Kisses to Michael. Hope he feels better. I love you too," and went back to work, never imagining that this exchange of messages would be read and reread hundreds of times in the following weeks, each word gaining an unbearable weight. At 7:15 inches the evening, Claire arrived at the Ashton. The restaurant was a discreet glass box from the outside, but luxurious inside. Walls lined with dark wood, soft lighting that made everything feel more intimate and expensive, sculptural floral arrangements on each table, flowers and branches arranged with almost mathematical precision, and a respectful silence that made people whisper. Even the waiters moved silently, like elegant shadows. Claire wore a gray tailored midi dress that elegantly concealed her growing belly and carried a leather briefcase with the final contract documents. She had looked at herself in the car mirror before entering and thought, "You did it. You really did it." The client was running late. The hostess, a young woman with impeccably styled hair, subtle makeup, and a professional smile, led her to a discreet table in the corner, near a window overlooking an indoor tranquil water garden with white stones arranged in geometric patterns, green bamboo swaying in an invisible breeze, and a water feature that dripped rhythmically. The sound was almost hypnotic. Drip, drip, drip. Claire ordered sparkling water, opened her laptop, and started checking emails while she waited. There were 17 unread messages. Most were congratulations from colleagues who had already heard about the contract. She replied mechanically, a small smile on her lips. "Thank you. Yes, I'm very happy. It was a team effort. Thanks for the support." It was then that she heard a laugh. Not just any laugh, but a feminine one, high-pitched at the start but ending in a low, husky, almost childlike rumble. A very specific sound, the kind that sticks in your memory when you hear it more than once. Claire didn't recognize it immediately, but something inside her tensed. It was a strange, visceral sensation, like when you feel someone watching you. She instinctively looked up, searching for the source of the sound, not knowing exactly why it bothered her, and saw him, 4 tables away, sitting across from a blonde woman with long, straight hair that fell like a golden curtain over her shoulders, was Richard. Claire blinked once, twice, certain she was mistaken, certain it was someone else, someone who looked like him. Chicago wasn't that small. Coincidences happened. But no, she knew those shoulders. She knew the way he tilted his head slightly to the right when he was paying attention to someone. She knew that specific gesture of running his hand through his hair. It was him, wearing the navy blue shirt she had ironed that very morning, still half asleep, the steam from the iron rising as she thought about her important meeting. He was wearing the wristwatch she had given him for his last birthday, a Tag Heuer that had cost 3 months of savings. Her husband, the father of the child she carried, the man who was supposed to be in Naperville visiting his sick brother. And he wasn't in Naperville. He was here, in this expensive restaurant, sitting across from a woman whom Claire finally, slowly, and painfully recognized. Jessica Carter, Richard's ex-girlfriend, the interior designer he had dated for 3 years before meeting Claire, the woman he spoke of casually when the subject came up, always assuring her that the past was buried, that there was no more contact, that it was a youthful thing. You know how it is. The floor disappeared from under Claire's feet, not metaphorically. She genuinely felt as if the polished wooden floor had dissolved and she was falling into a bottomless pit. They were sharing a bottle of red wine. Claire could see the label from where she sat, a Cabernet Sauvignon that she knew cost at least $150. The plates in front of them had barely been touched. Jessica was laughing, leaning forward, her elbows on the table, her eyes fixed on Richard with an intensity you don't use with strangers, not even with friends. It's the kind of look reserved for someone intimate, someone important. And he was smiling back, not the polite smile he used with colleagues or acquaintances, not the tired smile he gave when he came home and Claire asked how his day was. It was the relaxed, genuine, intimate smile, the smile she thought was reserved exclusively for her. Claire felt her stomach churn, a real, physical, uncontrollable nausea. She gripped the table, her fingers pressing into the wood so hard her knuckles turned white. Then, Jessica reached her hand across the table and touched his face. It wasn't an accidental touch, not a casual, quick touch you give a friend. It was a slow, deliberate, intimate touch. Her fingers slid along his jawline, down to his neck, stopping there, her fingers resting at the base of his throat. Richard didn't pull away. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't frown or flinch. On the contrary, he closed his eyes briefly, like someone savoring the gesture, like someone who already knew that touch and knew exactly what would come next. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a quick peck. It wasn't a surprise or mistaken kiss, the kind you see in movies where someone pulls away saying, "Sorry, I don't know what came over me." It was a deep, lingering, rehearsed kiss. A kiss that revealed practice, routine, familiarity. Their mouths fit together perfectly, without hesitation, without adjustment. Claire couldn't breathe. Literally, her chest seized up. She tried to draw in air, and nothing came. Her entire body froze. The noise around her faded into a distant, indistinct hum. The world shrank, concentrating only on that scene her eyes were registering but her brain absolutely and completely refused to process. She was pregnant, 5 months, carrying his child. She had just closed the biggest contract of her career and was there to celebrate. And her husband, the man she shared a bed with, the man who knew every inch of her body, the man who had cried when they saw the first ultrasound, was kissing another woman. A waiter approached her table, a middle-aged man in an impeccable uniform with a gentle smile. "Would you care to start with an appetizer while you wait, ma'am?" His voice seemed to come from far away, as if he were speaking from underwater. Claire didn't hear the question. Not really, but her lips must have moved, must have formed some automatic, socially acceptable response, because the waiter nodded politely and walked away. She didn't remember answering, had no idea what she had said. Her trembling fingers reached for her phone. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't stop to consider the consequences or what she would do with it later. She just acted with a mechanical precision that surprised even herself, as if some primitive part of her brain had taken over while the rest of her collapsed. She unlocked the screen, opened the camera, and zoomed in as much as she could without losing clarity. Her hands were shaking so much it took 3 tries to steady the image. And then she captured the exact moment. Richard and Jessica, lips locked, her hand still on his face, her fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck, the wine glass beside them reflecting the restaurant's light, the timestamp in the bottom corner of the screen marking that moment forever. 7:23 p.m., June 14th. Claire stared at the photo on the screen for a second too long. Part of her still hoped it was a mistake, that when she looked again it would be someone else. But it wasn't. It was real. It was happening. She opened her messaging app with fingers that didn't feel like her own. She found the conversation with Richard. His last message was still there. "I love you, Princess." Princess. She had always hated that nickname when they started dating. She thought it was silly, childish, but over time she had grown to like it. She came to associate it with affection, with security, with belonging. Now the word felt poisonous. Claire typed each letter, requiring a conscious effort. "Hope your brother feels better soon." She attached the photo. Sent. Then she placed her phone face down on the table and waited. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it. She could feel the pulse in her neck, her wrists, her temples. The baby moved inside her, a soft flutter that at any other time would have made her smile. Now it only made her insides clench tighter. 5 seconds. 6, 7, 8, 9. 10 seconds later, she saw Richard take his phone from his pocket. He glanced at the screen with a lazy smile, clearly expecting something mundane, a work message perhaps, or some random reminder. His face was relaxed, carefree. Then, his face changed. The transformation was instantaneous and brutal, the color drained from it. All the blood seemed to rush out at once, leaving him as pale as paper. His eyes widened until Claire could see the whites all around his irises, even from a distance. His mouth fell slightly open, frozen in an expression of absolute shock and horror. He dropped the phone. The device clattered on the table with a sharp noise that made Jessica jump back, confused, turning to him with furrowed brows. "Rick, what's wrong?" Richard didn't answer. He began to look around frantically, his head swiveling with jerky, uncoordinated movements. His eyes swept the restaurant in pure panic, searching for her, trying to understand how this was possible, how she was here, how he had been so stupid, so careless. Their eyes met across the 4 tables that separated them. Claire didn't look away, didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't do anything he might have expected. She just stared at him with an icy calm she didn't know she possessed, that she didn't even know she was capable of feeling. It was as if all the fear, all the pain, all the rage had been compressed into a dense, cold ball in the center of her chest, and from it radiated not heat, but ice. He was the one who looked away first. She saw the exact moment he couldn't take it anymore. His face contorted into something between guilt, desperation, and anger. Anger. She realized with a distant shock, as if he had the right to be angry for being caught. Jessica was still talking, her voice rising slightly, confused and irritated. "Rick, what is going on? Are you listening to me?" Claire didn't wait to see what would come next. She didn't want to hear the excuses. She didn't want to see him get up, come to her table, try to explain the inexplicable. She placed a $20 bill under her untouched glass of water, the one with the lime wedge still floating immaculately. She picked up her bag and the leather briefcase with the contract documents and walked out. Her steps were firm, controlled, 1 foot in front of the other. She crossed the entire restaurant under the gaze of a few patrons who noticed something was wrong, some kind of tension in the air, but didn't know exactly what. She passed the hostess, who smiled politely and said, "Good evening, ma'am." Claire didn't respond, wasn't even sure if she had heard. Only when she got to her car, when she sat in the driver's seat, when she locked all the doors and gripped the steering wheel so tightly her fingers ached, so tightly her palms turned red, did her body begin to tremble. Her hands first, then her shoulders, then her breath became short and ragged, as if her body had forgotten how to function properly. She didn't go home, or back to the office. She couldn't imagine entering that apartment, seeing their pictures on the walls, the bed where they slept, his clothes in the closet. She drove aimlessly through the streets of Chicago for nearly 3 hours, her phone vibrating incessantly beside her in the console. Calls, messages, notifications, all from Richard. The screen lit up every few seconds with his name. Richard. 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 She didn't open any, didn't answer any calls, didn't read any messages. She just drove, passing familiar places that suddenly seemed alien. The world had changed in 20 minutes, but the streets remained the same. People kept walking, laughing, living as if nothing had happened. Finally, around 10:30 p.m., Claire parked in front of a modest hotel near Millennium Park. It was one of those small 3-star hotels, mostly frequented by business travelers. Anonymous, safe. She checked in. The receptionist noticed her red eyes but said nothing, just handed her the key to room 204 with a professional smile. She went up to the room, took off her shoes, and lay down on the hard, strange bed that smelled of industrial detergent. She placed a hand on her belly, where the baby was moving gently, oblivious to the chaos crashing down around them, small movements like butterflies fluttering inside her. She closed her eyes and tried to focus only on that, on the baby, on the child that, regardless of everything, she loved more than anything. And then, alone in that silent, impersonal room, with the air conditioner making a monotonous hum and the world outside continuing to spin without a care, Claire began to cry. It wasn't a silent cry. It was a deep, convulsive sob that came from her gut. She cried until she had no tears left, until her throat was raw, until she fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, still dressed, with her makeup smeared across her face and her hand on her belly. The morning arrived like a crushing weight on her chest. Claire had slept for 2 hours at most. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scene replaying. Jessica's hand on Richard's face, the kiss, his smile, the way he looked so comfortable, so relaxed, so happy. Her phone was off. She had turned it off at some point in the middle of the night when the constant vibrations had kept her from falling asleep, even for a few minutes. Now, at 7 a.m., sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the blank white wall in front of her, she knew she would eventually have to turn it on. With fingers that still trembled, even after a whole night, even after crying herself dry, they still trembled. She pressed the power button, and the screen lit up. A barrage of notifications began to appear, one after another in an endless sequence. 42 missed calls, 38 text messages, 15 voicemails, all from Richard. Claire took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and then, with a calm she had to build brick by brick inside herself, she began to read the messages. Claire, for God's sake, call me. It's not what you're thinking. Please, come home. Let's talk. You're overreacting. It was just dinner. She's a friend. We just happened to run into each other. I can explain everything. Where are you? I'm worried. Claire read each message with a growing sense of unreality. He was still lying, even after being caught, even after the photo, still trying to manipulate the narrative as if she were an idiot, as if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes. And then came the message that made something inside her snap, like a dry twig. This is happening because you're always glued to your work. We never have time together. You pushed me to this. Claire read that line once, twice, 3 times, each reading making the anger rise hot and dense from her stomach to her throat. Less than 12 hours after being caught kissing another woman, not in a moment of weakness, not in an accident, but on a clearly planned date in an expensive restaurant with the ex-girlfriend he swore he no longer saw, Richard was already rewriting the narrative, turning his betrayal into her fault, making the victim the villain. Because she worked too much, because she had no time, because she had pushed him into the arms of another woman, as if he had no responsibility, as if he had no choice, as if he were a child with no control over his own actions. Claire felt bile rise in her throat. She ran to the bathroom and threw up. She vomited the water she had drunk, vomited the rage. When there was nothing left to come out, she knelt there on the cold ceramic floor, hugging the toilet of a cheap hotel, trembling. Finally, after long minutes, she got up, splashed cold water on her face, looked at her own reflection in the mirror, swollen eyes, pale skin, disheveled hair, and made a decision. She would not reply to any message, would not give Richard the satisfaction of a response, would not play his game, would not defend herself against ridiculous accusations. Instead, she would call the one person she trusted unconditionally, her older sister, Carolyn. Carolyn answered on the second ring, her voice still hoarse with sleep. "Claire? What time is it?" "It's 7:15 the morning, Carolyn." Claire's voice broke, the words catching in her throat. She tried again. "I need you." There was a brief pause, but Claire heard the exact moment Carolyn fully woke up, concern transforming her voice. "What happened? Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" Claire swallowed hard. "I need to get out of here. I can't go back home. Please, Claire, tell me where you are." Carolyn's voice was firm now, in the protective mode she had used since they were kids, and Claire would come home from school crying because someone had picked on her. "I'm coming to get you right now. Right now. Send me your location." Claire sent the hotel's location. "Room 204. I'm on my way. Don't move." 20 minutes later, Claire had counted every one of them sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. There was a knock on the door. She opened it. Carolyn stood there in sweatpants and sneakers, her hair still a bit messy, her eyes worried. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She just entered the room, pulled Claire into a tight hug, so tight that Claire felt her belly pressed between them, the baby making a small protest with a light kick, and let her sister cry on her shoulder until there were no tears left. When Claire could finally speak, when the words finally formed coherently, she told her everything. The contract, the celebration, the restaurant, Jessica, the kiss, the photo, the messages, the blame Richard was already trying to place on her, as if years of dedication, of building a life together, of promises could be erased because she had the audacity to have a career. Carolyn listened in silence, her jaw tight, her eyes gleaming with contained fury. Claire saw her sister's hands clench into fists, her knuckles turning white. When Claire finished, her voice failing on the last word, exhausted from talking, from reliving it all, Carolyn spoke softly, but with a firmness that left no room for doubt or negotiation. "You are not going back to that house. You're coming to my place. Now. You'll get your things eventually, but not alone, and not today. Today, you come with me and rest." Claire nodded, too grateful to argue, too relieved to not have to make decisions. Carolyn's house was in a quiet condominium in Lincoln Park with a view of Lake Michigan. It was a spacious, cozy townhouse, full of plants hanging ferns, pothos trailing down bookshelves, a huge fiddle-leaf fig near the window, and natural light that poured in generously through large windows. Claire had always loved this house. It was the opposite of the apartment she shared with Richard, all clean and minimalist with neutral colors and modern decor. Carolyn's house was warm, alive, a place that embraced you when you walked in. Carolyn set Claire up in the guest room, which she quickly transformed into a safe haven. Extra pillows piled on the bed, a soft wool blanket she brought from her own room, steaming chamomile tea on the nightstand, the curtains drawn to block the harsh sunlight. "Sleep," Carolyn said, brushing the hair from Claire's face. "Just sleep. I'll handle the rest." Claire turned off her phone again and tried to rest. She lay in bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, closed her eyes, but her mind wouldn't stop. The questions popped up uncontrollably, one after another, incessant, torturous. How long? How long had this been going on? How had she not noticed? There were signs. There must have been signs. There are always signs. What had she ignored? What had she chosen not to see? The times he came home late, smelling of a different perfume. She had thought it was from a client, from a work meeting. The times he was distant, looking at his phone with a smile that vanished too quickly when she asked what it was. Nothing, just work. And she believed him. Because why wouldn't she? He was her husband, the father of the child she carried. In the late afternoon, after dozing for a few restless hours, her sleep filled with fragmented nightmares, the doorbell rang. She heard it from the bed, her ears alert even in a state of semi-consciousness. Carolyn ran down the stairs, her steps hurried on the wooden staircase. Claire heard muffled voices, and then, unmistakably, she recognized Richard's voice, loud, desperate. "Carolyn, I know she's in there. Let me talk to her." "No." Carolyn's voice was firm, unshakable. "She's exaggerating. It was just a meeting. Jessica is a friend. We met up, and one thing led to another, but it doesn't mean anything. I love Claire. I love our family." "You kissed her, Richard," Carolyn cut in, her voice icy. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I was confused. Claire is always working. She never has time for me. I felt lonely. Claire, now sitting up in bed, her fists clenched against the blanket, felt the rage explode in her chest again. He was doing it again, blaming her, turning his betrayal into a natural consequence of her neglect. "She is pregnant with your child." Carolyn's voice came out low, but Claire could hear it perfectly. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, Richard, quieter, almost pleading. "That's why. She needs to think about the baby. She needs to be rational. She can't throw everything away because of one mistake. We have a family. We have a life. A moment of weakness can't destroy all of that." Claire felt sick again. He was using the baby, using their child as an argument, as a tool of manipulation, as if she were the one destroying the family, as if she were the irresponsible one. Carolyn's voice came out cold, sharp as broken glass. "She didn't throw anything away. You did. You destroyed this. Now get out of here before I call the police and say there's a man trying to break into my house. You never liked me. From the beginning, you tried to turn her against me. I did like you, Richard. I really did. I thought you were good for her, until you proved I was right to doubt you. Now go." The door slammed shut, a final, sharp sound. Carolyn came up the stairs quickly and entered the room, finding Claire sitting on the bed, her hands clutching her belly protectively, her eyes wide. "He's gone," Carolyn said, sitting next to her sister. "And he's not coming back. If he does, I'm calling the police for real." Claire nodded slowly, her throat too tight to form words. "You don't need to thank me," Carolyn continued, taking Claire's hand. "You need to protect yourself and protect this baby, and that's what we're going to do." The following Monday, after an entire weekend locked in Carolyn's guest room, only coming out to eat when her sister insisted, ignoring Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to make contact, Claire was sitting in the office of Dr. Helen Foster, a lawyer specializing in family law whom Carolyn had emphatically recommended. "She's good," Carolyn had said, "very good. And she has no pity for men who think they can get away with anything. Trust me." The office was in a sleek commercial building downtown. Helen was a woman in her early 50s, with short, graying hair cut in a modern bob, an erect posture that conveyed authority, and a direct gaze that conveyed both competence and empathy. She wore a well-tailored gray suit and discreetly framed glasses. Claire handed her everything she had brought: the restaurant photo printed in high resolution, Richard's messages saved as a PDF, the complete conversation history, and financial documents she had discreetly taken from home on one of the quick trips accompanied by Carolyn. Deeds, bank statements, investment records. Helen examined everything in silence for long minutes. Claire watched as the lawyer made notes in a file, her pen moving quickly, underlining important parts, marking details. Finally, she looked up, taking off her glasses and placing them on the desk. "Claire, this photo is solid proof. The messages are too, especially the one where he tries to blame you for his behavior. But I need to be frank with you. Even with proven infidelity, divorce proceedings can be complicated, especially when there are shared assets and a child on the way. Some judges are more traditional, they might push for reconciliation. I need to know, are you certain about this decision?" "Yes." Claire didn't hesitate. "Completely certain." Helen nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then let's get prepared. You were married without a prenuptial agreement, correct?" "Yes. It was the standard arrangement when we got married. We didn't sign anything." "The apartment where you live, whose name is it in?" Both of ours. We bought it together 5 years ago. Down payment and mortgage split 50-50. Helen made quick notes. And these joint accounts, do you have full access? I do. We always had a joint account for household expenses and individual accounts for personal things. And you both contribute equally to the joint account? He earns a bit more than me, so he deposits 60% and I deposit 40%. I see. And your personal savings? Claire hesitated. There was something important here. She knew it. In the last few months, Richard became very insistent that I transfer part of my personal savings to the joint account. He said it would be better for family planning, for the baby, that it would be safer to have everything together. Helen raised an eyebrow, her expression subtly changing. Did you transfer it? No, Claire swallowed. Something stopped me. I can't explain it. It was a strange feeling. I just felt I shouldn't, that something was wrong. Your instinct saved you. Helen leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Claire with a new intensity. Claire, I'm going to be direct. What you just told me, the insistence on pooling money, especially now during your pregnancy when you're more vulnerable, that raises giant red flags for me. I'm going to request access to his messages. I'm going to ask for a subpoena for his phone records, because something tells me this wasn't just an affair. This was planned. Claire felt her stomach churn, a coldness spreading through her body. Planned. I'm going to investigate. But for now, you do not talk to him. You do not answer messages. You do not answer calls. All communication goes through me. All of it. Understood? Understood. Helen picked up a business card. This is my personal number. Anything at all, no matter the time. You call me. If he shows up at your sister's house, you call me. If he approaches you on the street, you call me. If he tries to contact you through third parties, you call me. You are not alone in this, Claire, and we are going to do this right. 3 days later, on an ordinary Wednesday with an overcast sky threatening rain, Helen called. Her voice was tense. Claire, you need to come to the office. Now. Did something happen? I got the messages. You need to see this in person. Claire went. Carolyn drove because Claire's hands were shaking too much, and she didn't trust herself behind the wheel. When they arrived at the office, Helen was serious in a way Claire hadn't seen before. There was a thick folder on the desk, so full that some papers threatened to slip out. Sit, Helen said. Claire sat. Carolyn stood beside her, a hand on her sister's shoulder. I obtained the messages between Richard and Jessica from the last 6 months. 6 months. The world spun. Claire gripped the arms of the chair, and what I found. Helen took a deep breath. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together, and planning how to use you financially to make it happen. She opened the first page and turned the document toward Claire. Read, please. Claire looked at the printed words, messages in chronological sequence. She began to read, and with each line, she felt the floor disappear a little more. December 17th, 6 months ago. Jessica, when are you going to tell her? Richard, not yet. I need to make sure the financial situation is settled first. January 2nd. You promised you'd be out of there by the end of the year. It's a new year, Rick. Richard, I know, I'm sorry, but I need to get her to put her money in the joint account first. That way, when I leave, I get half of everything. If I leave now, I walk away with none of what she has saved. February 14th. Jessica, and the baby? Richard, it wasn't planned, complicates things, but it also helps. She'll be emotionally vulnerable, pregnant, insecure. It'll be easier to convince her to merge our finances for the baby's security. I'll pay child support later, no problem, but the assets stay with me. Claire read it once, twice, 3 times, 4. The words refused to make sense. Her brain couldn't process it. He had planned this from the beginning. For months, the baby, their son, the child she was carrying, who was kicking inside her at that very moment, was nothing more than a tool, a vulnerability to be exploited, a way to manipulate her. There's more, Helen said softly, turning the page. May 28th. Richard, she just closed that huge contract. She's going to get a massive commission. Jessica, perfect. How much? Richard, at least $250,000. Could be more. Jessica, Rick, You have to get her to put that in the joint account. Now, say it's for the baby, for the family's security, for the future. She'll believe you. She always does. Richard, I'm already working on it. She's resisting, but I'll keep insisting. Being pregnant, she's more emotional. She'll give in. Claire covered her mouth with her hand, feeling nauseous. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cold, calculated, planned manipulation. He had turned her life, her work, her pregnancy, even her professional achievements, into a script for his own enrichment. Carolyn squeezed her shoulder harder. There's more, Helen said, her voice almost a whisper now. Much more. Conversations about how he was going to demand high alimony, claiming he gave up career opportunities to support hers. How he was going to use custody of the baby to maintain financial and emotional control over you. How he was going to claim in court that you were unstable, negligent, a workaholic. He earns more than I do, Claire whispered, her voice hoarse. He always has. I know. But he was going to lie. He was going to build a narrative, and Jessica was helping him build every detail. They have conversations about how to act, what to say, how to behave to seem credible. Claire looked at the pages scattered on the desk. Months of conversations, months of planning. While she was working, while she was dreaming of their future, while she was choosing baby names, while she was setting up the nursery, he was planning to destroy her. Claire took a deep breath. The room was spinning, but deep within the pain, a pain so profound it felt physical, as if something was being ripped from inside her. Something stronger began to grow. Rage, not the explosive, hysterical, uncontrolled rage. A cold, calculated, determined rage. What do I do? Her voice came out firm, perhaps too firm for someone who had just discovered the last several months of her life were an orchestrated lie. Helen smiled for the first time since Claire had entered the room, a small but genuine smile. We destroy this plan, we expose everything, and we make sure he doesn't get a single penny that isn't rightfully his. And if we're very lucky, this here could be considered attempted fraud. I can send it to the district attorney's office for review. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions, documents, and legal strategies. Richard increased the pressure, calling constantly from unknown numbers. When Claire blocked one, he got another. He sent dramatic messages, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes trying to manipulate her with guilt. He tried to talk to Claire's mother, who hung up on him after hearing the full story. He tried to talk to mutual friends, who began to distance themselves when they realized something very serious had happened. He tried to talk to her colleagues, who politely said they didn't get involved in personal matters. He was getting desperate, and desperate people, Claire was learning, are dangerous. 2 weeks after the discovery, Claire received a call from HR at her architecture firm. It was Marcia, the human resources manager, a professional but always kind woman. Claire, I need to inform you that we've received an anonymous complaint against you. Claire's stomach dropped. A complaint, Marcia continued, alleging aggressive behavior and workplace harassment against an intern. The complaint is serious. We'll have to investigate. Claire was stunned, silent for long seconds. She barely spoke to the interns. She always treated everyone with respect, even with excessive kindness, because she remembered how hard it was when she was an intern. Marcia, that's a lie. I swear. I don't even know who this intern could be. I believe you, Claire, but we have to follow protocol. Marcia investigated. She interviewed colleagues, checked emails, spoke with all the interns. The investigation took 3 tense days. 3 days where Claire had to continue working while feeling the stares of her colleagues, the whispers, the speculation. The conclusion came. The complaint was completely false. No intern had any problem with Claire. In fact, they all praised her patience and helpfulness. And the HR investigation revealed something else. The complaint had come from an anonymous email, but the IP address was traced to an internet cafe near the office where Richard worked. Claire was furious. He was trying to destroy her career, the reputation she had built for a decade. And he didn't stop there. 3 days after the complaint was dismissed as false, 2 police officers knocked on Carolyn's door. It was a Saturday morning. Claire was having coffee when she heard the doorbell. Carolyn answered it. Claire heard formal male voices and felt her stomach clench. She walked down the stairs slowly, now almost 7 months pregnant, her belly prominent. The officers were at the door, in uniform, polite but serious. "Are you Miss Claire Anderson?" one of them asked. "I am." Her voice came out trembling. "We've received a complaint. Your husband, Richard Davis, alleges that you are harassing him, showing up at his workplace, sending threatening messages." Claire felt her legs buckle. Carolyn held her arm. "That's a lie," Claire said, her voice firmer now. "A complete lie. I haven't spoken to him in weeks. May we see your phone?" Claire handed it over without hesitation. She showed them the blocked conversations. She showed that the last message sent to Richard was almost a month ago, the one from the restaurant, with the photo. Nothing after that. 0 sent messages. "And he alleges you showed up at his work yesterday afternoon." "I was here," Carolyn intervened, showing photos she had taken of them having lunch together, complete with time and location stamps. "Claire is living with me. You can ask the neighbors. She didn't leave the house yesterday." The officers checked everything, asked questions, took notes, and it quickly became clear that Richard's story didn't hold up. They left, embarrassed, after making it clear the complaint would be dismissed. But the message was sent. Richard was desperate, and he was willing to lie, to use the police, to destroy her life if necessary. When Helen found out, she was furious. He just hung himself. "Filing a false police report is a crime. I'm adding this to his file." The divorce proceedings officially began in early August. Claire, now 7.5 months pregnant, entered the courthouse arm in arm with Carolyn, Helen by her side. Her belly was impossible to ignore now. She wore a simple, comfortable navy blue dress, no heels because her feet were swollen. Richard was there, on the other side of the hall. He wore a suit, something Claire rarely saw. He always preferred to work more casually. He was accompanied by a new lawyer, a burly man in an expensive suit and a brand-name tie, known for aggressive tactics in family court. When their eyes met for the first time in weeks, Claire saw something that surprised her. He looked awful, thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, his hair disheveled as if he hadn't been sleeping. A very small part of her, a part that still existed, felt a pang of pity. But she quickly crushed that feeling. The first hearing was procedural, technical. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Miller, tried to argue that Claire was emotionally unstable, that the pregnancy had made her irrational, that she was sabotaging the relationship over unfounded jealousy from an innocent dinner between friends. "Your Honor," Mr. Miller said in a pompous voice, "the plaintiff is clearly emotionally disturbed. Pregnancy hormones, as we know, can affect judgment. My client is willing to forgive this moment of irrationality and work toward reconciliation for the good of the child that is on the way." The judge, Eleanor Vance, a woman in her 60s with a tired but sharp gaze who had likely seen hundreds of cases like this, listened without expression, making occasional notes. Then, Helen stood up, elegant and calm. "Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that completely contradicts the narrative presented by the defense." She walked to the judge's bench and handed her the folder containing the messages between Richard and Jessica, all printed, organized chronologically, with the relevant parts highlighted. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read, page after page. Claire watched as the judge's expression changed from neutral to a frown, and finally to visibly disturbed. She read slowly, pausing at some passages to reread. After 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, the judge looked up, took off her glasses, and looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice controlled but sharp as steel. "These messages reveal a pattern of manipulation, premeditated financial fraud, and emotional exploitation of the plaintiff, who is pregnant with your child. I will read here for the record. She'll be emotionally vulnerable, pregnant. It'll be easier to convince her to merge our finances. These are your words." Richard swallowed hard. His face was ashen. That was taken out of context. "I'm not finished." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. "Do not interrupt me. I'll pay child support, but the assets stay with me. She always believes you. Mr. Davis, you lied about your intentions. You conspired with a third party to deceive your wife. You tried to induce her to transfer assets into joint accounts with the explicit goal of illegally appropriating them when you filed for divorce. This is not only immoral, it is potentially criminal. It could constitute fraud. The room was so quiet that the sound of the judge's pen tapping on the desk echoed like a gunshot. Furthermore, the judge continued, flipping through other pages, I see here evidence of attempts to damage the plaintiff's professional reputation through false complaints to her HR department. I also see a record of a false police report alleging harassment that has been proven not to have occurred. This demonstrates a clear pattern of abusive, manipulative, and criminal behavior. Richard was completely pale now. His lawyer tried to speak. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. The judge closed the folder with a sharp thud. I am granting an immediate injunction protecting all of the plaintiff's individual assets. Any attempt to access her personal accounts will be treated as a crime. The division of assets will be based strictly on the individual contribution of each party during the marriage, and an independent auditor will be appointed by the court to assess all assets, all accounts, all investments. Furthermore, the defendant is prohibited from approaching the plaintiff or the residence where she is staying. A minimum distance of 500 feet. This hearing is adjourned. We will reconvene when we have the complete audit and the forensic report on the messages. The gavel struck. Final. Richard stumbled out of the courtroom. Claire saw him as he passed her and Carolyn in the hallway. He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the floor. Helen smiled discreetly as she organized her papers. That went better than I expected. Carolyn hugged Claire. The hard part is over. But Claire knew it wasn't. The hardest part was yet to come, giving birth to a baby whose father had tried to destroy her. 2 months later, on a cold October morning at 5:40 a.m., Claire felt the first contraction. She was sleeping, or trying to, when the pain woke her, a different kind of pain, deep, that tightened her entire belly like a giant fist closing. She groaned softly. Carolyn, who had been sleeping in the next room with the door ajar ever since Claire entered her 9th month, appeared immediately. Is it time? I think so. 2 hours later, after increasingly strong and frequent contractions, Claire was at the hospital, in the delivery room, squeezing Carolyn's hand as the nurses prepped her. Do you want me to call him? Carolyn asked gently. It's his right to know. Claire thought for a moment. Then she shook her head. No, not now. Later, when everything's okay, but not now. The birth was difficult. 7 hours of labor, 7 hours of pain, fear, and exhaustion. But finally, at 2:15 inches the afternoon, Leo was born. 7 pounds, 9 ounces. 20 inches long. Dark eyes, still bluish as all newborns are, but promising to turn brown. Thick, black hair. A strong, healthy cry. When the nurse placed Leo in Claire's arms for the first time, she held him against her chest and cried, but not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude, from a love so intense it was physically painful. Because, despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the pain, the lawsuit, this baby was perfect. This baby was hers, and she had protected herself and this child. Richard asked to visit them in the hospital. Helen called Claire, relaying the request. What do you want to do? Claire looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in her arms. No, not now. He has a right to visits. I know, but I'm going to need time. And I want it to be regulated with set times, not just him showing up whenever he wants. Understood. I'll inform him. In those first few days, Leo was surrounded only by people who truly loved him. Claire, Carolyn, Claire's mother, a few close friends. No one who represented a danger, no one who could bring toxicity near this innocent child. The divorce was finalized 3 months after Leo's birth. January arrived with scorching heat, and Claire was back in court, this time stronger, more rested. Leo was at home with Carolyn, sleeping peacefully. The division of assets was clear and fair. The apartment was sold, and they each received exactly half. The joint accounts were divided proportionally to their proven contributions. Claire kept all of her personal savings, her investments, her commission from the large contract she had closed on that fateful night. Richard received what was rightfully his and absolutely nothing more. No alimony was granted to him. The judge was categorical in stating that he had worked continuously throughout the marriage, earned a good living, was professionally trained, had no financial dependency, and had tried to manipulate the system. Richard, on the other hand, would have to pay child support for Leo a fair amount, calculated based on his actual income, not the fictitious, diminished income he had tried to present. When it was all over, when all the documents were signed and the lawyers began to pack their briefcases, Richard tried to speak to Claire one last time. They met in the courthouse hallway, away from the lawyers who were conversing among themselves, finalizing bureaucratic details. It was a long corridor with a cold floor and white fluorescent light that gave everything a grim look. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to be so harsh. We could have worked it out another way. We could have talked." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months, and saw an unrecognizable man, aged, his skin dull, defeated. Not by her, Claire realized, but by his own choices, by his own actions. "Richard," she said calmly, her voice firm but without anger, without hatred, just with crystal clarity. "You planned to destroy me financially. You used our son as a tool before he was even born. You tried to destroy my career with false accusations. You lied to the police. I didn't do this. I didn't destroy you. I just protected myself. I defended myself. And if that seems harsh to you, maybe you should reflect on what you tried to do to me." "Jessica left me," he said suddenly, his voice breaking, his eyes becoming moist. "As soon as everything fell apart, as soon as she saw there would be no easy money, she disappeared. Blocked my number. Told our friends she couldn't deal with the drama, that I was too problematic." Claire felt no pity. She tried, for a brief moment, to search within herself for some remnant of compassion for the man she had loved, but found only emptiness, a quiet indifference. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Richard," she said. "I hope you learn, that you get better, that you're a better father than you were a husband, but it won't be at my expense, never again. And if you want to have a real relationship with Leo, you'll have to prove it with actions, not words." And then she turned her back and walked away, her steps echoing in the empty hallway. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate. She just left. 6 months later, on a sunny July afternoon, Claire was in her new apartment, smaller than the old one. Just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, an open kitchen, but entirely hers. Every piece of furniture, every object, every decorating decision was completely hers. She had decorated it with meticulous care, light colors that reflected light and joy, comfortable furniture that invited relaxation, plants, lots of plants like at Carolyn's house, and a light wood crib in the room next to hers, where Leo was now sleeping, lulled by the sound of a music box playing a lullaby. Leo was 7 months old, chubby, healthy, and smiley. He had recently started crawling and spent his days exploring every corner of the apartment, putting everything in his mouth, laughing that infectious baby laugh. Claire opened her phone and, almost without thinking, navigated to her old photos. She found it. The photo from the restaurant, taken on that night that changed everything. Richard and Jessica kissing, oblivious to the fact they were being watched. For a long moment, she just looked at it, trying to feel anger, pain, sadness. But she couldn't. Not with anger, not with pain, just with a cold, quiet clarity. That photo hadn't destroyed her life. It had saved it. It had saved her from living years, perhaps decades, in a lie. It had saved her from waking up one day at 50 and realizing she had wasted half her life on someone who didn't truly love her, who had only used her as a means to an end. Claire selected the photo. Her finger hovered over the delete button for a few seconds, and then she pressed it. The photo disappeared permanently. And when the screen went black, reflecting only her own tired but peaceful face, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Genuine peace. Not the easy peace of naivety or denial. Not the peace that comes from ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine, but the hard-won peace, earned with effort, with tears, with strength. The peace that comes from looking at the chaos and actively, consciously choosing to rebuild, from looking at betrayal and choosing dignity, from looking at the future, uncertain and scary, and choosing courage. Leo whimpered softly from his room. Claire got up, her movements automatic after 7 months, and picked up her son, cradling him against her chest. He still smelled like a baby, that inexplicable, sweet, comforting scent. "It's going to be okay," she whispered against his soft hair. "I promise. We're going to be okay. Just the two of us against the world, if we have to be." And for the first time since that night in June, she completely believed it. Time kept passing, as it always does, indifferent to human dramas. Months went by. Summer arrived in Chicago with its characteristic humid heat, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes even breathing feel like an effort. Leo was growing fast, surprisingly fast. Every day brought something new, a new word, a new tooth, a steadier step. Claire resumed her architectural projects with renewed energy. The contract she had closed on that fateful night, the one that was supposed to be a celebration but ended up being the beginning of the end, had turned into 3 larger contracts. Her reputation in the market was growing. Clients recommended her. Her name began to appear in architecture and design magazines. One autumn day, Carolyn came to visit. She brought a bouquet of yellow flowers, sunflowers, Claire's favorite, and a conspiratorial smile that Claire immediately recognized as a sign of interesting gossip. "You're not going to believe what I heard," she said, pouring coffee in Claire's small but efficient kitchen. "What?" Claire asked, settling Leo into his high chair so he could eat his baby food. "Richard is trying to get back with his ex-wife. Not Jessica, the first one from years ago, before you. I forget her name." "Ashley," Claire supplied automatically. "That's her." He called her, begging for a second chance, saying he'd matured, learned, changed. Claire raised her eyebrows as she wiped Leo's mouth. "And?" "She blocked him," Carolyn laughed. "Told mutual friends there's no second chance for someone who never learned from the first. Apparently, she heard the whole story with you and was shocked. Said he was always manipulative, but never to that extent." The two were silent for a moment. Then Claire laughed. Not a bitter, resentful laugh, but genuinely amused, almost relieved. "How ironic. You don't feel anything?" Carolyn asked softly, watching her sister carefully. "Anger, satisfaction, something?" Claire thought honestly before answering. "I feel pity. Not for him specifically, but for the person he could have been and chose not to be. He had everything a wife who loved him, a child on the way, a good life, and he chose to destroy it for greed and selfishness. It's sad, but it's not my problem anymore." Leo babbled from his chair, slapping his hands on the tray and splattering food everywhere. Claire smiled, picked up her son all messy, all chaotic, all perfect, and lifted him into the air. He giggled, that pure, unfiltered, uncomplicated, joyful baby laugh. "But I also feel gratitude," Claire continued, looking at her son, "because if that hadn't happened, I would have lived for years, maybe decades, in a lie. I would have raised Leo in a toxic, deceitful environment. Now I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I know I can survive the worst, and I know I will never again accept less than I deserve, and I'm going to teach Leo that too." Carolyn hugged her sister, careful not to squash the baby between them. "You're the strongest person I know, Claire." "I'm not strong," Claire said softly, gently rocking Leo. "I just learned to choose the truth, even when it hurts, even when it's easier to pretend. I learned that you can survive the truth, but you can't survive a lie intact." That night, after Carolyn had gone, after she bathed Leo and put him to sleep with the lullaby playing softly, Claire stood on her apartment balcony for a long time, watching the city lights turn on one by one as the sun set. Chicago was beautiful at night. It always had been. The yellow lights from windows, the headlights of cars moving like rivers of light, Lake Michigan in the distance reflecting the darkening sky. Claire hugged herself, feeling the cool night breeze. Leo was sleeping inside, safe. Her life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days. There were still sleepless nights when she wondered if she was doing everything right, if she was being a good mother, if Leo would miss having a complete family. There were still moments of anger or sadness when she thought about all she had lost. But she was free. free from the lie, free from the manipulation, free from the man who had tried to destroy her for his own benefit, free from the expectations and pressures of maintaining a marriage that was rotten on the inside, and finally, free to rebuild on her own terms, her own way. A few months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Claire was reviewing blueprints in her home office. She had rented a small commercial space, just one room, but it was hers. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. Unknown numbers were usually spam, but something made her click. "Claire, it's Richard. I know you don't want to talk to me, and you have every right, but I need to say something. I've spent the last few months in therapy, trying to understand how I got to that point, how I became the person I was with you. And I have no excuses. I screwed everything up. I lost you. I lost our family. I almost lost my son. Jessica used me as much as I tried to use you, and I realized it too late. But you were stronger. You saved yourself, and you saved Leo from growing up in a sick family. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know. You were right about everything. I was a cowardly, manipulative, selfish person, and now I'm paying the price. Loneliness, regret, the knowledge that I destroyed the best thing I ever had. You deserve all the best, and I will carry this regret for the rest of my life. Don't reply to this. I just wanted you to know." Claire read the message 3 times, then 4, searching each word for any sign of manipulation, any attempt to make her feel sorry for him, to shift blame. But she found none. It seemed genuine. It seemed to come from a real place of remorse. She didn't reply. She didn't block the number, but she didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. She didn't want to reopen that door, didn't want to restart that conversation. But she also no longer needed that anger, no longer needed to carry that weight. She simply closed the message and went back to work. And in that simple gesture, in that choice to move on without drama, without confrontation, without needing the last word, she finally realized she was healed. Not healed in the sense of forgetting, not healed in the sense that none of it mattered anymore, but healed in the sense that it no longer defined her, no longer controlled her. It was just a part of her past, something that happened and shaped her, but did not break her. 1 year after that night in the restaurant, exactly 1 year, Claire realized, looking at the calendar, she was organizing Leo's first birthday party. Carolyn's house was filled with colorful balloons, banners that read, "Happy Birthday, Leo," in big letters, and the laughter of children and the animated conversation of adults. Her whole family was there, Claire's mother, aunts, cousins, true friends, the ones who had stood by her during the worst, who hadn't disappeared when the drama started, who had offered a shoulder, a home, food, unconditional support. Richard wasn't there. He would see Leo on his scheduled visit the following weekend, as always. The visits had been difficult at first. Leo was wary, he cried. He didn't want to stay, but over time, he got used to it. And Richard, surprisingly, was being a present father. Not perfect, but present. He took Leo to the park, played with him, returned him on time. It was enough. Leo, his little party hat askew on his head, his face smeared with blue frosting, giggled as he tried to stick his hands in the cake again. Claire caught him just before he could make a bigger mess, wiping his chubby hands with a wet wipe as he protested with indignant babbles. Claire looked around. Her mother was chatting animatedly with aunts she hadn't seen in months. Carolyn was organizing games for the kids, always the organizer, always taking care of everyone. True friends Marcia from the office, Paula from college, Robert, who had been Richard's colleague but sided with Claire when he understood what had happened, were toasting and smiling. No one mentioned Richard. No one mentioned the past. No one looked at her with pity or that poor single mother gaze. They looked at her with respect, with admiration, with love, because Claire had finally built something new. Not on the ruins of what was, not as a reaction to what she had lost, but something completely separate, authentically hers. And when it was time to sing Happy Birthday, when everyone gathered around the cake with a single candle shaped like the number 1, when Leo clapped his hands, not quite understanding what was happening but feeling the joy around him, Claire blew out the candle for him, because he was still too little to blow, and made a silent wish. Not for justice, she had already won justice. Not for revenge, revenge never brought anyone peace. Not for answers, she already had the answers, and they hurt, but they were true. But for lasting peace, for continued strength, for the wisdom to raise Leo on her own, without letting resentment poison his upbringing, for love, self-love, love for her son, love for the life she was building. And looking around, seeing the smiles, feeling the comfortable weight of Leo in her lap, hearing Carolyn's laugh, feeling her mother's hand on her shoulder, she realized her wish had already been granted. The life she had rebuilt wasn't perfect. Leo woke up crying in the middle of the night. Money was sometimes tight. There were days she felt too exhausted to get out of bed. There were moments of loneliness, especially at night when Leo was asleep and the house was quiet. But it was real. It was honest. It was hers. And that, simply that, surprisingly that, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.